Benny Goodman and Charlie Christian's Airmail Special has quite the eccentric B section. How would you approach playing the following chords? 4 bars of C diminished, and then descending C diminished, B diminished, B flat diminished, A diminished, then A flat 9 to G9. So it's pretty much all diminished chords. Well, in today's lesson I'm going to break down exactly what Charlie Christian did there and what another prominent guitar player did who also played for Benny Goodman. But also dig into how we can approach, in general, playing over diminished chords. Now, if you want the tab and the notation, links in the description, as well as a link to my Patreon page. So first off, what's the issue here? It's clearly the fact there's loads of diminished chords, and often us guitar players run scared of those. But really, it's not that. Joking aside, it's the fact that these diminished chords aren't necessarily working in the way that they do in maybe a more accessible way in other compositions. Take Have You Met Miss Jones, just the opening 3 bars where we've got F major, then F sharp, diminished, going to G minor 7. What you hear there is a diminished chord working like a dominant, leading us to the 2 chord G minor 7. Now, why does that work? F sharp diminished, F sharp, includes the notes F sharp, A, C, and E flat. That's actually the notes of a D7 flat 9 minus the note D. D7 flat 9 would be D, F sharp, A, C, E flat. So this diminished chord here is really functioning like a dominant 7th flat 9 chord. Now D7 happens to be the dominant, the 5 chord, which will lead you to G. So it leads us perfectly into that G minor 7 with nice voice leading because everything's so close. F, F sharp, G. So Miss Jones. There you go, you hear that. It leads us there. Whereas in this B section, we don't get that sense of resolution. We get this really unhinged C diminished for 4 bars. It requires something odd. You just listen to it as a chord. And then with the second line of the B section, you do get a sense of going somewhere, but everything happens very quickly. Everything tumbles down. C diminished, B diminished chromatically, B flat, A diminished, then I like to play A flat 9 to G9, but you could play A flat 7, G7 for easier voicings. Now that Have You Met Miss Jones diminished 7th, I could just play, think of it as a D7 really with a flat 9, and then I don't need to do anything particularly special with it. But here, I think we're going to have to think more carefully. Now, quite often people would just say, well, just use the diminished scale, and for a diminished 7th like this, what you'd want to use is the whole half diminished scale, which is never easy to finger. It's an octatonic scale, got 8 notes, and it just keeps going whole step, half step, whole step, half step, until you reach the octave. We're going to do 2 octaves here, say like this. But the trouble with that is it doesn't, to me, jump out as accessible melodies. For the second line, I'd potentially need that for B, B flat, A, and A flat. I think that would be crazy to sort of try and think like that or do stuff like that. I need to get into that kind of sound, but dig out little ideas. If I just played the arpeggio of the C diminished, so I'm basically taking away 4 notes, I'd have this. But I think just making sure we can hear the chord and hear the arpeggio, da, 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 da. Making sure you can sing it and you really appreciate the sound of it rather than all this stuff just being fingers moving to places. So we've got the scale, very tricky to play, difficult to create ideas with. Got the arpeggio, a bit more accessible. Let's see what Charlie Christian did and try and see if we can learn from him. So at the start of the B section, Charlie Christian went. Now I can hear the arpeggio tones really clearly there of that C diminished. Now if I put this on the screen for you, and I've slightly changed the rhythm just to make it a bit more accessible here. The red notes are notes of the arpeggio of C diminished 7th. So the first red note's E flat, next red note's a C, next red note's an A or B double flat, and then the next one is G flat, and then finally we land on an E flat. So if we took our arpeggio, I could fill the gap between every note. Or maybe just a bit. That type of idea. So if I tried to do something similar myself, I could do something like 1, 2, 3, 4. And what I did there, chromatically filled between arpeggio note and the next arpeggio note from E flat down to a C. And then after that I play the arpeggio. So it's going arpeggio note, chromatic, chromatic, arpeggio note, and then this is arpeggio, arpeggio, arpeggio. And then back one note there. So all the notes of the arpeggio apart from the two chromatic notes there. That. Here's another one. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. Same concept. This time I went up from an arpeggio note of the C diminished up to an E flat, so chromatically filled the two notes in between. And then I came back down the arpeggio for 3 notes, and then I did chromatic fill from the next note of the arpeggio down. So we've got 2 lots of the Charlie Christian chromatic fill at the start, there, then arpeggio, then chromatic fill down. So, simple thing we can learn from Charlie. Now, if you haven't heard of Chris Flory, he's a fantastic guitar player. I urge you to check him out. But he happened to play with Benny Goodman in the late 70s, early 80s, I believe. And his way, actually, I think, is very much built upon what Charlie was doing. No surprise there. And just looking at it on the screen, what I think he's doing here, just this first bit, that is the equivalent of what Charlie did. Fills the gap between 2 diminished arpeggio notes, but then fills the gap coming back. So he just goes up and down. So it's the same concept, but just going up and down, whereas Charlie just went down. And then that arpeggio notes apart from the hammer-on note. The second part of it, same concept, go up from a diminished note, chromatically to the next one and back down. And then diminished arpeggio notes. In both Charlie and Chris's sort of approach there to that first 4 bars of just C diminished, I think that the notes of the chord come across really strongly, but the addition of those chromatic passing notes just creates more interest. I think it adds to the craziness of the B section, and is a very simple tactic to do, and it's much easier than thinking about, you know, that scale, which is just very difficult to get your fingers used to, and just to get used to the sound of it, really. And what we're essentially think we're getting from both guitar players is just something pretty accessible we can hear, providing you know the sound of a diminished chord well on your arpeggio. Now, if I took Chris's idea, I've just written what I could maybe do for the first 4 bars, maybe using triplets. So I'm doing the 1 arpeggio note, go up to it, filling the gap and back down, and then a bit of the arpeggio. So 1, 2, 3, 4. And what I was doing there is going up in minor thirds. Move up in minor thirds, same thing. Up again. One more time. And that's another, obviously, device you could do. Move around in minor thirds, which is obviously happening in the case of Charlie's B section. So first 4 bars. Thank you, Charlie and Chris. I think I've got some things I can easily do myself there. In terms of practice, you could take that C diminished arpeggio and practice filling the gaps. If I take the way Charlie did it. Are we left with something as crazy as the scale? Potentially, but I think it's easier to hear what's going on. Practice that down as well. Now the next 2 bars are the crazy descending diminished. 2 beats on C diminished, B diminished, B flat diminished, A diminished. In Charlie's case, he is just playing arpeggios up from the root. Maybe not easy to execute at a fast speed, but it's comforting to know that it's not like a big flowing line over. I mean, it sounds great. Now that last bit, I feel like he's anticipating the A flat 9, the next chord. But it is just arpeggios, just as the chords change. So C diminished, B flat diminished, and then breaking out towards the A flat 9, G9 before we go back to the A section. In Chris's case, he does the same thing, slightly simpler in that he plays 3 notes, da 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 da, but going down, just arpeggios of each diminished chord. Now I think that's a very sensible plan that I am going to steal. Don't know, something like that, I don't know.